So I want you to imagine with me that we are going on a walk. It's a cold winter night, and we have about a dozen young children with us, and some youth and other adults, and we are out Christmas caroling. We're going from door to door, knocking, and we have this is the hard part, little loaves of bread that our volunteers have made, and we're taking them out, and we're knocking on doors, and we're inviting people to stand and listen to us as we sing our favorite Christmas carols. For the most part, people welcomed us. But then there was one door we went to, and a man answered the door, and he was not a gentleman at all. He didn't greet us warmly. He was quite rude to us. He didn't want our bread, and he said, "I'm not going to stand here with my door wide open and let the cold in while you sing your songs." And he shut the door. We quickly gathered the group of children, and we headed down the sidewalk, and all the while he was blustering on and on, aiming his unfriendliness especially at the children in our group. And as we walked away from his house, I could hear him inside, and I said to the children and those with me, "Bah humbug!" And of course we all laughed, just like you did. But I may have spoken a little bit too loudly, or perhaps he saw us laughing, because we could hear the man getting a little bit louder behind his door, exclaiming from inside of his house. And so I turned and I looked, and I saw him peering through the curtains of his window, making gestures at us as he watched us usher the children away. Well, I did my best as I looked at him to smile and wave, thinking it best not to return the gesture. And as we left, I was thinking, this is what it's like to meet Ebenezer Scrooge. Now, I'll be honest, I was really annoyed by such thoughtlessness from a man who would behave that way in front of a group of young children. I did have some words for him in my mind. My mother's sitting over there laughing because she knows me. And I know I would have loved to have made that gesture right back at him, but thankfully I kept myself in check. But it wasn't easy. And that's why I've always found it hard to accept the actions of Scrooge's nephew in A Christmas Carol. On the surface, Fred seems to be one of the most uninteresting of Dickens's carols. I mean, Scrooge fascinates us. The long-suffering Bob Cratchit carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. Jacob Marley and many of the other characters that we meet intrigue us with their combination of flaws and virtues that make them like us, make them human. But Scrooge's nephew is different. His wife at least reacts like we would probably expect ourselves to react if we had someone like Uncle Scrooge in our family, but not good old Fred. No, he just smiles and he laughs and he wishes Scrooge a Merry Christmas and he keeps his good cheer. Fred doesn't seem to have any faults that we can find. Perhaps Dickens created him so kindly because he was, after all, the son of Scrooge's beloved sister, Fan. And so he wanted her son to be as kindly and loving as she was. After all, of all Scrooge's family, it was Fan who was the one who loved him unconditionally. Still, good old Fred continues to wish nothing but the best for his uncle. How can anyone, think about that, how can anyone do that in the face of continued rejection? Of course, there's Jesus, I suppose. He could have done that. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus said, "But I say to you, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other one also." Well, that sounds easier than done, doesn't it? Easier said than done. But C.S. Lewis, who was a great teacher and theologian, once said, "We all agree that forgiveness is a beautiful idea until we have to practice it. It's hard to love when someone is hurtful to you. Now, I'm going to give you a fair warning. This may be difficult for you to hear, but simply saying you are a Christian doesn't make it any easier for us in theory or in practice. Being a pastor didn't make it any easier for me to forgive that rude man the night of the caroling party. The truth is, in almost every church that I have ever had a connection to, I have heard of long-time conflicts between church members who have been offended by one another. And then, of course, there are our families, right? That's another sermon. But when the hurt comes from people that we care about, it cuts deep, and it makes it even harder for us to forgive. There's a great story that happened in Spain. It's the story of a father and his teenage son who had a strained relationship, and the son had refused to mend the relationship, and he ran away from home. But the father would not give up, and so he began a journey in search of this rebellious son. Finally, after looking and looking in a desperate effort to find him, the father decided to put an ad in the local newspaper. The ad read, "Dear Paco, meet me in front of the newspaper office at noon tomorrow. All is forgiven. I love you, your father." And so the next day, the father arrived at noon in front of the newspaper office, only to find 800 Pacos gathered together, all seeking forgiveness and love from their fathers. The story never tells us whether he found the right one. But we all carry hurt and pain in our lives, and in some ways, that may actually be good. Experience can teach us a lot, but sometimes experience can teach us the wrong thing to do as well. Experience had taught most of the people to give up on Ebenezer Scrooge, but not his nephew. Now, good old Fred remained hopeful even when there seemed no reason for hope. The ghosts of Christmas did not give up on Scrooge. They came with the hope that they could help him change his life. Sounds a lot like God, doesn't it? God who loves and cares for all of us. So imagine for a moment the pain that God must feel when the people of the world are inflicting pain on each other. "When you do this to the least of these, you do it to me," said Jesus. The ghost of Christmas present, which, by the way, I was very proud of my son, have to just say that. He revealed the children of want and ignorance inside his robe, and he reminded Scrooge of the neglect that he and his greed must have imposed on the innocent. Isn't it funny that A Christmas Carol is one of the season's most beloved classic tales, and yet we seem to have not learned the lessons that the story wishes to teach? Still today, there are people going hungry on the streets. There are people who have no home. Innocent children are dying. In some places, children are not receiving any education. There is violence and injustice in the world, even at Christmas time. You would have thought that God would have given up on us a long time ago. But God never gives up. In the same way that we say God is love, God is also hope. God extends that to us continually, hoping that our lives will be changed, hoping that we will be more and more like God. During this Advent season, we remember the biblical voices of those long past who proclaimed God's hope. The prophet Isaiah proclaimed, "Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and cry to her that she has served her term, her penalty is paid, and she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." John the Baptist picked up on those very words of Isaiah, continuing the message, saying, "Prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." One who is more powerful than I is coming after me, and I am not worthy to carry his sandals. Voices of hope, reminding us that God is eternally patient, compassionate, and merciful. This Advent season asks us to consider a couple of things. One is whether we are preparing a way in the wilderness of our lives today, our personal lives, and the world in which we live. Are we making straight a path in our hearts where Jesus can truly come in? Or are we willing to live in a place where we will continue to accept a world of vengeance and judgment that offers no mercy? The first step to changing the world is to change ourselves. Perhaps that might be the summary statement if you were writing a paper on a Christmas carol. In the words of Mahatma Gandhi, he said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." But in order to do that, we need to begin where God begins, by not giving up on ourselves or on others. If we search our experiences in life, I'm sure each one of us can find a time when we were rude or hurtful or uncaring to someone who just didn't deserve it. Who knows? Maybe they did deserve it. Nonetheless, we might find that in our hearts, we want God to forgive us for what we said. And wouldn't it be wonderful if the person we hurt could also extend some forgiveness to us? God wants us to use our experiences in life to help us to open our hearts to others, not to close them off to others, not to walk away when there's a conflict between us. The kindness and mercy of Scrooge's nephew helped open Scrooge's eyes to his own hatred and bitterness. Fred helped him see that the one most hurt by his merciless behavior was Scrooge himself. And through his example of mercy and forgiveness, Fred was able to help Scrooge change. So Fred isn't really a flat character. He's a source of hope. God's message of hope for this world is this: there is mercy and forgiveness in the midst of our selfishness and destructive behavior, and God continually reaches out to save us. At this time of year, we pause to remember the birth of the baby Jesus, the one called Emmanuel, God with us. And he came with a message of hope and love, reaching out to save us and showing us the way to be patient and forgiving and merciful with one another. There was an editorial in the Charlotte Observer that I want to share with you as I close today. It was an article about what Christmas is all about. It goes like this: God's gift of ultimate hope that our human destiny is something more than a brief doomed moment in the benign indifference of the universe. Christmas is a time not only to remember the birth of a child, but remember that it was the birth of a special hope, that this child would bring about change in us. It happened for Scrooge. It can certainly happen for us. Amen.